Support for Swan Song is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. Moving along in the list of launch titles for the WonderSwan Color, we've got the first Color exclusive title, and it's a doozy, serving double duty as the top-selling WonderSwan game of all time. That's right, on this episode it's finally time to take a look at Final Fantasy, developed and published by Square and released alongside the WonderSwan Color on December 9th, 2000. Final Fantasy would not have been possible without Dragon Quest paving the way and proving that role-playing games could be successful if executed properly, ultimately leading to series creator Sakaguchi Hironobu's pitch finally being accepted. Sakaguchi was unpopular within Square because he was known for being a demanding boss who had never produced a hit game, so developers had gravitated towards other development teams within the company with a history of success. This, combined with Sakaguchi's own lack of confidence in his ability as a game writer, had him considering quitting the game industry altogether if his dream project didn't sell well, leading to the choice of the name Final Fantasy once the original title, Fighting Fantasy, had to be changed due to a trademark conflict. The original team was just 4 people, Sakaguchi included, but would grow to a core of 7 members including some absolute all-stars of the JRPG world. Ishii Koichi, who would later go on to create the Seiken Densetsu or Mana series, would join as planner. Kawazu Akitoshi came on board as a game designer and scenario writer. As an avid fan of Western tabletop RPGs, he would try to infuse as many aspects of those not typically seen in Japanese RPGs into Final Fantasy before going completely off the rails, non-derogatory, in his own saga series. Ito Hiroyuki designed the battle system, despite never having played an RPG prior to this project, and would go on to design the battle system for most Final Fantasy games all the way up to 12. The face-to-face party system was inspired by American football teams facing each other at the line of scrimmage and executing on their plays. At the time, the superstar of the team was Iranian-American developer Nasir Gebeli, who was notorious for his work on Apple II games prior to working at Squaresoft, to the point of being idolized by other employees. He served as the programmer for Square's games for the Famicom 3D system, the first 3 Final Fantasy games on the Famicom, and Secret of Mana, before retiring to California. Final Fantasy, alongside its contemporary Dragon Quest, would define what we would eventually refer to as the Japanese role-playing game subgenre. While both Western and Japanese role-playing developers would share the same influences in Wizardry and Ultima, the markets were very different. Western developers would continue to meet role-playing games where they already were on home computers and double down on aspects of the games that were difficult to adapt to the constraints of game consoles. Japanese developers would fork away from their relatively niche computer gaming market and instead try to make role-playing games mainstream by piggybacking on the success of the family computer. They did this by sanding away the complexity of the computer games, streamlining things until they could be comfortably enjoyed on lesser hardware capable of less impressive graphics, and whose input was limited to a directional pad and 2 buttons. This evolutionary fork in the road would only become more pronounced over time, with Western role-playing games generally offering more narrative systems to players, which allows them to be more expressive in how they choose to build their characters, interact with NPCs, and move questlines forward. Japanese role-playing games instead often prescribe a story and background to your characters and limit your in-game systems to combat only, with far fewer paths to player expression outside of combat. Final Fantasy was a huge deal when it released on the Famicom in 1987, and 7 years later in 1994, Square would report that 1.3 million copies were sold worldwide, with 700,000 copies being sold in North America. While Dragon Quest had a modest following on the NES, Final Fantasy is really what put Japanese RPGs on the map in North America, with Western critics calling out its more fleshed out story and diversity of vehicles and exploring the overworld as key differentiators. Shockingly, Final Fantasy for the WonderSwan Color marks the first port of the game since the release of the Final Fantasy 1 and 2 compilation on the Famicom in 1994, and would become the base for the next 15 years of ports. More on that later. In 2022, for the 35th anniversary of Final Fantasy, Team Ninja and Square Enix released Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, and PC. This fever dream of a game is a prequel to Final Fantasy I with real-time combat similar to Team Ninja's Neo series, but incorporating a version of Final Fantasy's job system which allows you to switch movesets in the middle of a battle. I love this game to death, and I would hate myself forever if I didn't mention it this episode, so sorry, not sorry. Final Fantasy sets up your party as being the 4 Warriors of Light from Lucan's Prophecy. Your party are 4 youths, each chosen by an elemental crystal to defeat the 4 fiends to restore light to their crystals, and restore elemental balance to save the world. At the start of the game, you create a party of 4 characters and assign a class to each one, either Fighter, Thief, Black Belt, Red Mage, White Mage, or Black Mage. Each character class specializes in a different thing and has unique restrictions on which equipment they can and can't use in battle. You can have multiple characters in your party share the same class, leading to interesting challenge runs like the 4 White Mage Challenge, where you try to beat the game with 4 healers and no characters that specialize in any form of damage dealing. Your party will wander around the overworld and come across towns and dungeons. Towns will contain a number of NPCs which will either have nothing useful to say, or guide you in the direction of where you need to go next. They'll also contain shops in which you can spell Gil and acquire items, equipment for your party, and magical spells to teach your mages. Across the overworld and inside dungeons, as you walk around, you'll run into random combat encounters with other creatures. Combat in Final Fantasy is turn-based, with the player selecting each of their party members' actions from a menu. Successfully defeating an enemy will grant your living party members experience points and award you some Gil to spend in a shop next time you're in town. If all your party members die, however, you'll be kicked back out to the title screen and lose all projects since your last save. As you gain experience points, your party members will level up, increasing a bunch of their stats over the course of the game and making them more powerful. Later in the game, your party members will be able to ascend to an upgraded class, making them more powerful and opening up more combat options. Overworld traversal starts on foot, but with enough time to unlock other transportation methods such as a ship, a canoe, and an airship, all of which would become recurring transportation methods throughout the series. None of this sounds particularly special in 2025, it just sounds like the baseline feature set for any kind of JRPG, but that's precisely the thing. This is the baseline that it helped direct in the first place. Perhaps the biggest gameplay difference with later Final Fantasy games is the magic system, inspired by Vancian magic from D&D. Caster characters have a maximum of 3 spell slots per spell level. Each level of magic has a set number of charges, which can be used to cast a spell from that level. When you run out of charges, you need to go rest at an inn to restore them to full. The more your casters level up, the higher level magic they can cast, and the more charges they accumulate. This system adds a lot of friction to the game, as the lack of restorative items for magic means you can't really use magic as much as you'd want in the early game without lots of back and forth to the inn. Later reports would attempt to fix this by either replacing the magic system with MP outright, or tweaking higher tier restorative items to grant magic charges on use. Final Fantasy would only mark the start of mainline series ports to the WonderSwan Color, with a port of Final Fantasy II coming in 2001, and Final Fantasy IV coming in 2002. A Final Fantasy III port was also planned for the WonderSwan Color, with a release intended for December of 2001. That release never materialized, and all mentions of it were scrubbed from the Squaresoft website once the end of production for the WonderSwan Color was announced. Rumors have circulated saying that due to the scope of the game, Squaresoft was unable to fit a port of the same quality as Final Fantasy I, II, and IV into the cartridge size constraints of the WonderSwan, leading to its cancellation, much to my chagrin as an FF3 fan. In 2002, Final Fantasy I and II Premium Package was released on the PlayStation, later released internationally as Final Fantasy Origins. This bundle included ports of the WonderSwan Color version of FF1 and 2 with higher resolution sprites, a rearranged soundtrack, a revised localization, and some bonus content. In 2004, Final Fantasy I+2 Advance was released on the Game Boy Advance, later released internationally as Final Fantasy I and 2 Dawn of Souls. This release greatly resembles the WonderSwan Color version, but makes some balance changes and retrofits some of the bonus content from the PlayStation version into a handheld form factor. The biggest changes introduced are a radical change to the magic system, which replaces the spell charge system with the MP system used by most of the rest of the series, and the introduction of 4 bonus dungeons. In 2007, Final Fantasy was re-released onto the PSP as part of the Final Fantasy 20th Anniversary Celebration project. This release combined the Dawn of Souls gameplay adjustments with the FMV cutscenes produced for the PlayStation ports, acting as the most complete version of this era of Final Fantasy ports. This re-release served as the base for the iOS, Android, and Windows Phone ports of Final Fantasy. This version would also make it onto the 3DS as a Japan-only pre-order bonus for the release of Final Fantasy Explorers, with it being released onto the eShop a year later. In July of 2021, Square Enix released the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Collection, an attempt to standardize and modernize all sprite-based Final Fantasy releases for iOS, Android, and Steam. The FF1 port would undo a lot of the changes made as part of the Dawn of Souls project to make it more authentic to the original release, such as reverting the magic system to its original form. While the visual style of the game does retain much of the look of the original WonderSwan style, it has been redrawn and incorporates elements and refinements from character and monster sprites found in other re-releases of the game. Later, the Pixel remasters would also ship on consoles. There is something immensely comforting about playing a JRPG distilled to its essentials, especially on a handheld system. One of the keystones of good handheld game design is having activities that scale across a range of attention and focus levels, and it's something that we've lost as the lines between handheld and home consoles have become blurred by products like the Switch and the Steam Deck. Even though Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is technically playable on the Switch while on the go, I've had to stop doing that because there are so many cutscenes and I can't guarantee that I'll be in a position to give them my undivided attention when they inevitably ambush me. For better or for worse, with modern handhelds, the burden of choosing which games are better suited to the usage patterns of handhelds and home consoles has been shifted onto the consumer. I feel like we're ultimately more forgiving to the more tedious aspects of older turn-based RPGs on handhelds, because they're often a better fit for the focus level we have when we're out and about with our handhelds. Time in front of our televisions and gaming monitors is a limited resource, especially when living with others, and we're naturally much pickier about how we spend that time than we are when we're literally just filling time during a commute, a flight, or in a hospital waiting room. Maybe it's just the brainworms that result from analyzing a handheld library for however many years talking for me, but I feel like too often we just want to hand out a binary good or bad judgment on game design decisions, when it might be smarter to think about whether recontextualizing how the game is played may make those design choices more palatable. Final Fantasy may not be the kind of game that gets people excited to play on the big screen nowadays, but to me it has found new life as a staple comfort food of the handheld realm. The visual refresh it got is a timeless classic and is forever ingrained into my mind as what sprite-based Final Fantasy looks like. Sure is a shame about that cancelled FF3 port, huh? It's hard to pinpoint anything in particular that's outstanding about the game by modern standards. It's a tried and true formula that started the series and made it blossom into the household name it is today. Perhaps most importantly, it just feels like home.